Well, good afternoon, and thanks so much for being here. I've had a wonderful visit to the University of Michigan, thanks to Henry, Yafing, Calvin, and so many others of you. We do quite a bit of work in the area of sensing systems and infrastructure sensing at UT Austin, which is something that you all do a whole lot of in the context of MCity. In fact, immediately after this presentation, I'm supposed to be moderating a session that is part of another US DOT center on position navigation and timing considerations related to infrastructure sensing. But what I want to talk about today is completely different from the nuances of the technology associated with infrastructure sensing. And I want to go a little bit more into some more of the behavioral aspects of what we might do as humans within an autonomous vehicle. And when I use the term AV or autonomous vehicle, I'm talking about a fully autonomous vehicle over here, not partially automated systems. Maybe, is this, okay. I would be remiss, of course, if I didn't give due credit to my co-authors in this work, Kate Danner-Miller, who just completed her master's. Excuse me, Katie Asmussen, who's the current PhD candidate, and Aupal Mondal, who's also a current PhD candidate. So we all know that AVs, it certainly have taken, the concept of AVs has taken the world by storm. Certainly you have AVs being ushered or heralded as providing substantial benefits to society. And on the transportation side of things, there is excitement of AVs based on the potential accessibility, for example, to older individuals, mobility challenged individuals, safety benefits potentially, and also the traffic processing benefits. Now, one can debate about how much these benefits will bring, but I'm not going to get there. But what I do want to talk about is another issue, which is AVs may also facilitate the use of travel time that now can be relegated to the pursuit of other activities. So the driving task, once we are relieved of the driving task, we can potentially pursue other activities, and that can release time elsewhere in our daily activity travel schedules and potentially provide some benefits. So before we get to AVs, even in the current human-driven world, there may be some positive value associated with travel. This is an issue that has been raised in the field for over 2 decades. One of my colleagues, Professor Mokhtarian, has done some work in this area. But when we are actively partaking in the driving task, it's only possible to pursue a limited set of activities. At least we better not be texting and driving, right? So ironically then, if we are able to gain some value in a human-driven environment in terms of travel time, it should be that at least in part, this valuation is because we just like the idea of cutting out from the chatter of the humdrum of life, the routine of life, okay? We are in our private space, our cocoon, no one can connect with us, right? We are driving and we probably can be listening to wonderful music and being in our own private thoughts. Now, that probably should be one reason why at least some people value the travel time. Kind of, sometimes it's referred to as the gift of transition from a workplace to, for example, going home. So let's now look at time use in an AV. Now, travel time may become less burdensome because I can use the time of travel to release time elsewhere to pursue other enjoyable activities. And from that standpoint, the valuation of travel time savings might go down. It might not be that burdensome in an autonomous vehicle. But on the other side, travel time may become less enjoyable because the pressure to use travel time productively than being able to switch the mind off, that can itself engender stress, right? So this is what we want to pursue a little bit more, trying to get a better understanding of what happens or what might happen in an autonomous vehicle. Now, when you look at the literature, simulation studies abound that consider reduction in valuation of travel time savings of 50 to 100% relative to current car driver valuation of travel time savings. The basic idea is following on the first reason over there, which is I can release time, I can potentially be more productive, and so I don't consider travel time to be as burdensome, okay, as in a human-driven environment. Many studies have considered that as a reason to, reduce the valuation of travel time savings in an AV environment. And these are just some review studies. If you go to those studies, you'll see so many studies following this notion of a reduction. But some other studies have questioned this level of reduction by saying, it should be a more modest reduction because, yes, we might be able to pursue other activities, but there could be issues of elevated motion sickness when you're reading, which happens when you're in a vehicle, limited ability, you don't have your table to be pursuing, whatever work you might want to do, limited space, and again, it could take away from that gift of transition time. So some of these studies are listed over here. To these reasons, we add the potential mental agony or guilt from chilling during travel, right? And in a human-driven environment, again, I can be cut off. I can be in my thought space. Now, if I'm in an autonomous vehicle, might there be pressure to actually be productive in some form? And could that lead to a new conflict between maximizing productivity on the one hand, but then also maximizing well-being is important? So that could be some kind of a new conflict that is engendered in this process. And there's one study, Pudane et al. In 2019, which is the only study I think we found that starts suggesting that this might be happening. And this was done in a focus group of about 25 people. Now, I should say that in part, this work was inspired by an observation I made, actually a self-realization I had, which is I used to go to Hong Kong, and it used to be a 16-hour flight from Dallas-Fort Worth to Hong Kong, direct, nonstop. I loved it. I loved it because no one could connect with me, okay? And this happened until about 5 years back. And suddenly, American Airlines, yes, I'm a loyal American Airlines. I always travel American Airlines. They probably thought this guy is having too much fun and we had to spoil that fun. So they decided to introduce Wi-Fi on that flight, okay? And immediately, my enthusiasm for that flight, it nosedived, okay? I was thinking, why is that happening, right? So my daughter would correctly say, Dad, you should exercise self-discipline. Yes, that is true, but the idea that maybe I can start cutting out the number of emails, otherwise I have to address on the other side that will accumulate, right? So that started getting me into Wi-Fi, okay? Earlier, I didn't have that option, and it was wonderful. Now I have the option, it creates an engender stress. So that was something that really, in many ways, was a platform for this thought and idea we had. And as I was thinking through this, I was talking with my students. I don't know how many of you know Eric Miller. He's a good friend of mine. He's from Toronto. And he told me something which was along the same lines. And he was saying, until about 7 or 8 years back, I would travel to work in public transit. and I would just enjoy life gazing out the window, right? And then, of course, this thing happened, smartphones. And he said, suddenly I saw everyone around me staring at their smartphones. And I started thinking to myself, should I also start doing it? And I stopped gazing out the window. Okay. So these kinds of, things that build in terms of angst within ourselves to be productive, that can itself lead to potentially a reduction in mental wellness, if you will. So the basic idea is, yes, maybe this will be something enjoyable for many people, being able to do other activities. But the question is, how much will also that be the other side where people might feel angst and might not enjoy travel as much in an autonomous vehicle? Now, I'm going back to many studies that assume 50 to 100% reductions. So basically saying travel time is going to become so less onerous. In the past, if you think about it, what we used to do is we used to model travel behavior. What do people do? How do they travel, etc.? And based on those models, we would kind of impute a value of travel time savings. It's an imputation. What might be the value of travel time based on the behavior we're observing? And that could be used for, cost benefit analysis of different kinds, etc. And what we felt was that the field, in our mind, not completely appropriately so, has started moving the other direction, where for autonomous vehicles, what you're trying to do is tinker with the value of travel time savings, and then try to see what that would do if I reduce the value of travel time savings by 20, 30%, what will happen to behavior, okay? And we think that it's the wrong direction. We believe that we have to start from the travel behavior side, what people do, what activities they pursue, and then go from there to, if you want, imputation of value of travel time savings. So this is really the basic idea. We are pursuing the first way of doing things, which we believe is much more appropriate. So then the question becomes, why might there be a change in value of travel time savings? A simple reduction in the travel time penalty does not fully capture the potential impact of onboard activities on daily activity schedules. The basic idea is, when we talk about activity-based travel, we are talking about how we pursue activities within spatial temporal prisms that we have, constraints that we have, right? And if we want to understand how AV travel is going to impact our overall activity patterns, we need to understand what kinds of activities are pursued within the autonomous vehicle and how much they might substitute or complement activities pursued outside the vehicle. Okay, that's what we need to be doing. That's the basic idea. So what did we do in the current study? We focused on travel-based activities. So the travel-based activities could be work, study, talk, read, entertainment, relax, social interaction, being road fixated. These were, the range of activities that we provided a response, and also respondents could provide an open response for what they did, what they would do in an AV environment. So we focus on travel-based activities. Now, the other thing is we will use the term travel-based activities here. We will refrain from using the term productive activities or worthwhile activities, because what is productive and what is worthwhile can be a very subjective issue, can vary quite a bit. Now, productive activities may be typically associated with actively engaging cognitive functionality of the brain. Now, one can argue, though, that cognitive functionality is also triggered by simply gazing out the window. When you look at the Oxford Dictionary, cognition is defined as a mental process or an action that leads to understanding knowledge, etc., through senses, through our thought processes, and through experience. And hey, certainly gazing out the window can lead to profound self-realizations, right? I'm not completely sure about this, but my kids tell me that, who's the Harry Potter author? The author of Harry Potter, J.K. Rowling. They tell me that J.K. Rowling, she was inspired just gazing out the window, traveling on a train for this entire Harry Potter series. So, hey, this could also be certainly a productive activity, you know. And we don't like the term multitasking in this context. I know it's used before for the simple reason that multitasking has a connotation of a proactive and deliberate attempt to engage the cognitive functionality of the brain, right? While sleep, would that be characterized as part of being multitasking? We don't know. It's difficult to make that statement. So we just like to stay away from all of these labels, and we just prefer the label travel-based activity. So all through, we'll talk about travel-based activities, not productive, not worthwhile, no talk about multitasking. That's the way we believe would be appropriate. Now, we also look at activity-based travel, and admittedly, we look at two macro levels of activity-based travel: additional local area trips that might be generated in an AV, and additional long-distance road trips that might be generated because of an AV. So we look at all of these things together, right? So in a joint model. Why is it important to model these things jointly? One of the things we are trying to see is, you know, in an AV, if people pursue more of travel-based activities of some kind, what does it do to other activities and travel outside the autonomous vehicle? If we want to do that, we have to be very careful, and we have to model all of these things jointly for a simple reason. So consider a person who is very safety conscious today. That person who is very safety conscious might be exposing herself or himself less by traveling less in general, right? I'm very safety conscious, I'm going to travel less in general, okay? Now, in an AV, but we cannot say that it's a road fixation that is reducing this kind of travel, because this lower level intensity of travel and road fixation might be simply engendered by the safety consciousness of this person, okay? Similarly, a chill person, a very relaxed person, might tend to travel more, just have fun in life, okay? And the same person in an AV might be more likely to relax, have a good time. Now, that doesn't mean that if a person relaxes, it's going to lead to more trips over here. It could be simply because this person has a chill personality, okay? So we need to model all of these things jointly, and after we model them jointly, we can then try to tease out what might be a true causal impact of participation in TBA on ABT. So that's the basic idea. It's a joint model. So I won't go into the literature much, but there's been a lot of work in this area within the context of multitasking, which we would rather say travel-based activity. You can see some literature over there. To our knowledge, travel-based activity as well as activity-based travel jointly in an AV setting. And we also focus on the trip generation aspect of travel as opposed to commute mode choice, which has been studied quite a bit within this general area. Okay, so let's look at the survey and some results. We conducted a survey in the Austin metropolitan area. We had about 970 respondents. To model all of these things jointly, we used a latent construct approach. These are psychosocial variables, which are stochastic. And by having all of the TBA and ABT dimensions be functions of these four latent constructs, we are able to construct jointness within the entire set of dimensions. So technology savviness, we know what that means. It's possible that people who are technology savvy may be more likely to play games, entertainment on their computer, etc., while traveling in an AV. Safety concern, people who are safety concerned might be more road fixated in an AV. Being chill, we talked about that, and general interest in travel-based activities. So how did we collect the data? So for travel-based activities, this was the question posed. You can see it over there. Suppose you're traveling in an AV, which of the following would you do in the vehicle during your trip? Select up to 3 activities, okay? And they could select from this slew of activities that we presented to them. Now, when we looked at the travel-based activities we presented, they fell very nicely into 7 distinct categories. There were some categories like play games, which was picked by very, very few individuals. We could not have a separate category for that. And play games almost always was picked as one of the top 3 along with these 2. So we decided we would try to aggregate some of these responses into 7 distinct categories: work, talk, text, read, watch movies, or these are all entertainment, we call it, relax, and social interaction and road fixation. We had enough data on all of these 7 categories. This is just a quick picture of the percentage of responses that picked each of these in the top 3. So 37.5% of respondents picked work study in their top 3, and you can interpret all the others in the same way. As you can see, talk, text, entertainment, and relax, they are highest. They are most often pursued by individuals. And by the way, they are also the most likely to be pursued jointly. So a person can participate in multiple of these activities. And so these were the 3 which were most likely to be picked. Interestingly, road fixation and work study, no respondent picked both of those in their top 3. Okay, and they were most likely to be the sole purpose or the sole TBA pick. Okay, only 1 response, right? Overall, you can start looking at this. We'll start referring to talk, text, read, entertainment, relax, and social interaction. We'll call these chill activities. Okay, quite distinct from work study and quite distinct from road fixation. Now, how did we collect information on activity-based travel? How likely are you to make additional local area trips and additional long-distance trips? And this is just an ordinal Likert scale. People responded on the scale. Now, in terms of data description, very generally speaking, people seem to indicate that they are more likely to make additional long-distance trips. You can see more of the purple and the blue corresponding to somewhat likely and very likely to make more long-distance trips in an AV relative to current conditions, right? So you see more of purple and blue, basically meaning that people indicate they would make more long-distance trips, more so than they would make local area trips in an AV. I won't go over the distribution of the latent constructs because of constraints of time, but we were able to map some indicators to some of these latent constructs. This is a joint model, and there are some cool methodological nuances in this modeling, which again I'll leave so that we can go into the results and have some time for general discussions. So in terms of latent constructs, what we find is women tend to be overall less tech savvy. This could be simply a result of encouragement, stereotypical encouragement of boys and men toward technological gadgets, unlike what perhaps even today our environment is, that is not that encouraging for women. Some of these are pretty straightforward in terms of interpretation. Women with kids, they are very safety concerned regarding an AV. Okay, we have seen this time and time again. Women in particular, they say, I'll not leave my kid or allow my kid to be going alone in an AV. Okay, I just don't want that, right? So many of these seem to, fall into a reasonable space in terms of interpretation. So I won't go over any of these. But let's look at some of the latent construct or psychosocial effects on activities pursued during travel. Not surprising, if you have a chill personality, you're more likely to engage in chill activities. If you're safety concerned, you tend to be more road fixated. Okay, just looking at the road, even in an AV, I don't care. I'm going to just be road fixated. And interest in TBA tied to participate in different kinds of activities, including work and chill. We also found some variations in the types of activities pursued based on individual level characteristics, in addition to the impacts of demographics through these latent constructs. For example, women tend to talk and are more likely to talk and text or read in an AV relative to men. That's a result we found. Certainly, talking and texting could be viewed as a facilitator for social interactions. And there's a whole lot of literature that suggests that women in general tend to be more social than men for a variety of reasons, which we will not go here, but there's a lot of support for that. And so household level characteristics also impacted the types of activities individuals pursued. Of course, if you are from a household of high income, more likely to participate in entertainment activities. I mean, perhaps, even the idea of having Netflix or other kinds of things in an AV that might not be within the reach of some segments of society. And single parents relative to couples tend to be way more road fixated. Okay, maybe there's something to do with the responsibilities of being a single parent. You want to be alive. That's the bottom line. For a long time, I recall, sometimes people would think this is weird, but my wife and I would not travel on the same flight, right? For similar reasons. If something happens to one of us, there's at least the other. So single parents might have a little bit more of that kind of, I need to be there for my progeny. That's the word I would use. We also found impacts of latent construct effects on activity-based travel. This is not surprising. Again, safety concern implies that you would be making fewer local area trips and fewer long-distance road trips, which adds to what I indicated earlier. This safety concern is a latent stochastic construct, and what it leads to is more road fixation, and it also leads to a drop in the local area long-distance activities. So unless we take this association into consideration, we will not be able to capture the true impact of activities pursued in the vehicle on activities pursued outside the vehicle. Let me go. So I want to spend a little bit time on this, and I'll wind down so we can have some time for discussions. With all of this, we are able to determine what might be the impact of pursuing travel-based activities on activity-based travel after we consider the jointness. And what you find is that if a person participates only in one chill TBA, and it's one out of 5 that I identified earlier as chill activities, then overall, there's a likely 15% increase in the number of local area trips and a 34% increase in an AV in the number of long distance trips. If a chill TBA is combined with a road fixation episode or a work study instance within the AV, then you have a slightly elevated increase in local area trips and in long distance trips. But the highest impact is if a person pursues only multiple chill activities, right? And we didn't find any difference between rote fixation or work study. And in fact, what this says is that if you think of rote fixation is what we do today. If I'm driving as a human, I have to be rote fixated, right? So if you can think of this as the base, what it's saying is, at least according to our study, if a person pursues work and study in an AV, that doesn't seem to have much of an impact on the number of long distance trips or the number of local area trips. It is more if that work study is with a chill TBA or chill TBAs in particular, they are the ones that increase the long distance trips. It goes back to our original hypothesis that maybe this 100% reduction in valuation of travel time savings, that's probably not right. We don't believe that's right because work study, it doesn't seem like it's going to impact much of number of trip making and the number of trips that are being generated. So that's the basic conclusion from this study. So overall conclusions, we caution against the use of uniform value of travel time savings factors to see what might happen in an AV environment because people's activities differ so much based on demographics. Okay, and so one simple reduction factor is not going to do much, and we have to be very careful about that. Our analysis basically says we have to consider TBAs and ABTs as a joint package. Otherwise, we might get more associations than actual causal effects. And if we don't consider that, it could exaggerate TBA effect and overestimate VTTS lowering, as we believe might have been done in earlier studies that say 50%, 100% reduction in the valuation of travel time savings. We also would like to recommend some scholarly restraint in the use of the terms productive activities. So subjective, as I indicated earlier, or even the term multitasking, right? I mean, sleeping could be a wonderful activity, but now, is that even a voluntary response? It could be involuntary, right? So, I mean, this multitasking has a connotation of a proactive and deliberate activation of our cognition. Again, our study suggests that work and study activities within an AV doesn't do anything to the number of local area trips and long distance trips. Agreed, there's a macro representation, but that's what we find. On the other hand, chill activities, they seem to have more of an effect on the number of trips, long distance and local. So what that suggests is, yeah, you know what? This option of opening travel to pursue work study, non-chill activities might actually be creating some angst, might be making people not looking forward, and so they don't make as many trips as if they were pursuing chill activities in an AV. So this angst and less enjoyable travel that suggests that we need to examine travel-based activities in a much broader context of emotional well-being and the quality of life considerations. So the bottom line is AVs could erode into our time of tuning out, of just, totally being in our private thoughts and in our private space. These are issues that are getting much more attention today in the transportation field. The whole notion of transportation, mobility, and quality of life and well-being. One of my good friends and I, we have a couple of papers in this area, and many others too have had. I'm talking about Professor Ram Pendiala And this I think is an important consideration. How does our mobility patterns impact our emotional wellness and mental wellness? Of course, like any other study, there are limitations. I can go on and on. Larger sample size would be good. We had a very aggregate characterization of activity-based travel. We just said local area trips and long-distance trips. You can think about so many different dimensions of activity-based travel. And a little bit more of exploration of this broader context of life rhythms, well-being, and quality of life considerations would be certainly helpful. Now, one could, one could question the reliability of the stated preference responses. We asked them, hey, this in an autonomous vehicle environment, we actually had a video of what it might look like. And we elicited responses based on this video. Perhaps having a virtual reality-based presentation mechanism for what an AV might actually look like might potentially provide better preference responses. Of course, the point to be made over here, though, is for something in the future, which is not available today, there's no other alternative other than to pose hypothetical scenarios, present hypothetical scenarios, right? Trying to project what people do today, let's say in public transportation, to an autonomous vehicle, that could be as much questioned, if not in my opinion, way more questionable than having some of these stated preference type questions to elicit responses. We all know that we as human beings behave very differently when we are in our private space related to when we are in public transportation along with many others. So I would say, projecting what we might do in public transportation today is going to be way different than what we would do in an AV environment. I'd like to end by acknowledging USDOT support for the Center for Automated Vehicle Research with Multimodal Assured Navigation. And also my associate, she has a daughter, Macy Macias, and you can see that I stretch out all my students, and Macy Macias, she comes and calms all of them down. So certainly would like to acknowledge Macy in all of this. So let me stop there. And I'm happy. I had to rush through some of the slides and presentation. I had to gloss over some things, but I look forward to discussions.
A question slash comment. Under chill activities, you had aggregated things such as eating and drinking, playing, and work study.
Not work study.
Work study, watching.
Entertainment. Right.
From the perspective of somebody getting motion sick, drinking is a lot less likely to induce motion sickness as opposed to playing, let's say, a video game. You reach into a bag of French fries.
Right.
You don't like the multitasking phrase, but something you could do while you are actively looking out the window and you figure out how to get that cup with the straw up to your mouth without looking at it.
Right. Yeah. Go ahead.
I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Monica Jones on motion sickness, but I think that actually would could contribute significantly to your expectations about the relative frequency of short and long trip taking. And it has to do with, she's been examining actual activities in the vehicle and the accelerations associated with the induction of motion sickness. And so the relative distribution of different types of accelerations on long trips, if one assumes you're using highways and interstates, is very different than the short trips in town where you have a lot of traffic signals and signs that you're stopping for.
Yeah, good points. Good points. There's a lot more that can be done with this. Peeling the onion. I think that's just so much more that can be done. So as we collect more data, I think it would be helpful to look into some of these things at a fine level of detail. I will say this, within the context of the sample we had, which was about 970, we actually tested various different combinations of the 7 activities that we had, what that would do to activity-based travel in terms of number of trips. And what we found, surprisingly, at least within our data, is that it didn't matter which chill activity we were talking about. All of those chill activities had the same impact on trip making. If done individually or if they're done in combination, we didn't find differential effects on the number of trip making. Now, this within our econometric model. And so in the last slide, I had only 3 rows. One was if you pursued one chill activity. So it didn't matter which chill activity you pursued, the percentages we found there were pretty consistent. If one chill activity was combined with a work study activity or a road fixation activity, it didn't matter which chill activity we were talking about. Again, those percentages held. And the last one was when you had multiple chill activities. Now, if we had more data on each of these chill activities, which means if we had a much larger observation set, we might have been able to see some of these differences, but within our thing, we didn't. Now, the other thing also I would say is, you're talking about motion sickness issues, considerations, etc. But there's also a control issue, right? So, road fixation tends to happen more, I think. Today, if you're a passenger, I find this quite a bit. And, my wife is a wonderful driver, I think. I sometimes think she drives very aggressively. I hope she's not listening. But when I'm on the passenger side, she's driving. I keep telling her, be careful, be careful, be careful. I'm road fixated. Okay. Interestingly, when I'm driving, she's doing the same to me. So I think that when we give up this driving control, there is something in us that either makes us pursue, regardless of what the chill activities to a certain extent, or gets us road fixated to a certain extent based on our personalities. So that might temper some of the differences that you're talking about within the chill activities themselves. Possible.
My limited experience with automated vehicles is that they follow all the rules. They go at the speed limit, they come to complete stops, whereas when I drive on the road, I find that people do not. They speed, they roll through stop signs. And so I'm thinking that in some trips, certainly, the automated vehicle is going to take longer to get to its destination than the person who is driving their car. So consequently, it does take longer. They have to get up earlier. And consequently, I would think they might be tired and want to sleep more in the automated vehicle because the trip is longer and they have to get up earlier. What's your thought on that?
I think, the whole notion of it goes back to the definition of what is a productive activity, what is a worthwhile activity. For single parents, for example, sleep might be the most desirable activity in an autonomous vehicle, right? Because they are so time poor. Now, that's why I would like us to refrain from the use of productive, worthwhile, multitasking, etc. But we did find, I believe in our results, that, for example, single parents had more sleep instances than non-single parents. But I think what you're saying is, if we had a little bit more information on the times of travel, that might give us some additional information. We did not collect that information in this survey. We just collected information on number of trips. And by the way, that's one more big issue. I think it would be nice in future studies to not only look at the number of long distance trips that people might make, but also look at the length of those trips. That would be another important thing.
Yeah, I have similar points effectively about this sensitivity to motion sickness and also the perception of time, that some people may have a different perception of time, and in a short travel they may say, well, I'm not going to engage in this because I don't have the time to do it. And on the longer trip, I may have a possibility to engage into another.
Good point. Now, by the way, I should caveat, I had to gloss over this. We actually presented different scenarios of trips. So we presented to some respondents the scenario where they were traveling alone to work. For some other individuals, we presented the scenario of traveling with family on long distance trips. Okay, so we presented different scenarios because the trip purpose and the trip accompaniment with whom you're traveling or alone could also impact what kinds of activities. So we took that into consideration. And I'm not able to show all the results, but it's available in our paper. So the final results I showed was for people going on long distance trips. So presented with the idea, if you were traveling on a long distance trip with family members, the last table I showed was for that particular thing. But we did find that for local trips, local area trips, people were more likely to either gaze out the window or be road fixated, because it's too short a time to pursue anything. Taking out your notebook computer to do anything is not worthwhile, or it does not do you any, it does not provide you any value for short distance trips. So yes, we did find that there was a difference based on trip purpose and accompaniment, but we did not go that one step further. Within local area trips, we did not ask for distance related responses.
Is there also an influence of the trust in the system? That you trust the driver, or you trust the speaker, or you don't? And that may also affect the behavior.
Absolutely. And that was what we had using the safety concern psychosocial construct. So people who are very safety concerned, they're going to be road fixated. That's what they say in an AV. There's a clear relationship there.
Hi, Professor. Thank you for the presentation. It was very thought-provoking. I think you might have mentioned this or referenced it earlier in a response, but I'm curious. So the presentation, you specifically were focused on trip generation. My question is, are your thoughts on maybe increase in BMT, or specifically origin destination choices, like work choices, places you live, that sort of thing?
Yeah, one of the works with one of my former graduate students, Moore et al., talks about where you live, how that might change. If we have an AV environment, when we have an AV environment. And yes, we did find that people are more likely to move farther away from their workplace. No questions about that. But we also found in that study that some of the vehicle miles of travel increases that have been projected by simulation studies based on decreasing or increasing the value of travel time savings, those are, in our mind, exaggerated. Yeah.
It's a beautiful study. So I had the fortune of working with Gary and David, and you came and presented there.
So, I need you to go back and say exactly what, because my student might be sitting out there listening. So go ahead with your first sentence.
Sorry, it already told me he doesn't understand what I'm trying to say. So, it's a beautiful study. And I had the fortune of working with Dr. Mukherjee, so I am slightly, I know a little bit more about the satisfaction. So I'm curious to know that if there was any question about what's the current transportation behavior or experience of the participant. So my question is more like, if people who are using public transportation already and doing a long distance trip, is there expectation from AVs or activities related to AVs same as the people who are driving?
Good point. We did not distinguish. So we did not distinguish between current public transit users and current drivers. So the question was, if you are presented with this AV environment, relative to the number of trips you're making now, what would you do in an AV environment? Would your trips increase substantially? Some, so we had that ordinal gradation, but we did not quite distinguish. But the way the questions were presented, I think it's fair to say that the general interpretation would have been in personal vehicles.
Hello, and thank you for your presentation. So I work for an automotive company who is really interested in that topic. And I would like to get your thoughts on maybe continue this topic you just mentioned. Is how different would you say that the behavior would be in an autonomous shuttle, for example, or in a robotaxi, which is kind of not yours, so it's not private, but you have private moments in that vehicle, and in opposite to your own vehicle. So we see that the market is involved more in the public transportation sector and then in the robotaxis market. So we have some around an hour already and so on. There's a lot of Zooks and other technologies they're already testing that in the market. And so my question would be, how do you see that the people they're already testing that technologies, how their behavior, and if it's different, if it varies a lot from public transportation, robotaxis, or private vehicles?
Okay, so I think it really depends upon whether you have another individual in the vehicle or not. In some of the tests being conducted today, for example, one could think of current ride sharing. When you ride hail, Uber or Lyft, okay, I'm able to do other activities when there's a driver, okay? Can I project that into an AV setting, right? So if you ask that question, our investigation suggests that that's not transferable at all, that we have to be extremely careful. And again, the bottom line is, when we are alone, we do things very differently than when we have another person in our space, right? So for example, let me give you women. What we found is that they were more willing to share a ride in a ride-hailing situation today, okay? But you put them in an autonomous vehicle with another person, stranger, they say, no, they won't ride it. Relative to men, they are more unlikely to ride in an AV with another person. But today, they are more likely than men to have pooled ride-hailing. What the difference is? It seems like as though women today, when they consider the driver of the ride-hailing as some kind of a protector. While in an AV, I don't have that driver. And if I have a stranger, I'm very concerned. I'm not going to use it. So I think we have to be very careful in projecting what people do today in public transportation or in ride-hailing situations and take it forward to an AV. Now, one can argue, is that better than using stated preferences or not? That's an open debate. There are different ways of getting to it. But we think that there's a lot of value in getting, putting people, presenting them with a hypothetical situation and trying to extract some information from that. How much credibility do we have in that? That's an open philosophical debate that we can have for years on end.
What about the reactions to in-monitor, in-cabin monitor systems? So cameras and things like that.
What are you? I'm not sure I understand.
So you mentioned that, for example, in the ride-hailing market, there's a driver, right? And then if we substitute the driver behavior, or I mean, the person who hypothetically would take care of the riders of a camera, then I mean, it's again related to the question of you saying about that maybe you have the environment.
That's certainly an open question. That's an open question. I'm not sure that I'm able to address that. Based on the investigations we have done, I think there are different ways of trying to get at what people might do. The basic point is we really don't know. And there are different avenues. So virtual reality, you're talking a little bit like virtual reality, right? Can I put a person in a virtual reality setting and so even there you have cameras, so people might react, and that might provide us more information. So there's a lot of additional insights that can be gained by pursuing this line of research.
So there's a number of questions from online as well. I don't think we're going to have enough time, but maybe I'll ask one of the questions from online. What assumptions, if any, were made regarding the tools and methods of performing activities? And then when performing a trio activity, was the assumption that a laptop or tablet, PC or smartphone were used, and would method or tool impact the result of preferences?
It might impact, but we didn't ask the vehicle through which these activities were pursued. So we didn't ask if reading was done using a book, reading was done using a tablet. We didn't ask those kinds of questions. It was simply the activity types.
A related question, they mentioned that motion sickness has been a detrimental factor to performing these fellow-based activities. Is that being considered in the survey?
We did not have an explicit question about motion sickness, but I brought it up as one reason why some earlier studies have suggested that the increase in vehicle miles of travel that have been suggested by previous studies might be just on the extreme side.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really I appreciate the opportunity. I would have loved to be here to take a few more questions, but I need to get to the airport by 3:45 because at 3:45 I need to moderate another session for our other US DOT center. But it's been a pleasure. Thank you.